The summer heat hung heavy in the air that evening, making everything feel slow and tired. But there was nothing slow about the little girl running down the dusty road. Her small feet kicked up clouds of dirt as she raced from house to house, her face wet with tears. She was only 7 years old, with scraped knees and a pink t-shirt that had seen better days. Her breath came in desperate gasps as she pounded on the first door she reached. Bang, bang, bang. Her tiny fists made surprisingly loud sounds against the wooden frame. "Please, someone help," she cried out, but the porch light stayed off. Through the window she could see the blue glow of a television, but nobody came to the door. The curtain moved slightly, just an inch, and then fell still again. The little girl didn't waste time. She ran to the next house, her legs burning with effort. This time she rang the doorbell over and over, pressing it so many times it created an annoying, continuous buzz. Still nothing happened. She could hear a dog barking inside, but no footsteps came toward the door. "Why won't anyone help?" she whispered to herself, feeling panic rise in her chest like a wave. Her mama was in trouble. Real trouble. And every second she wasted out here was another second her mama was alone with those scary men. She kept running. The houses in this part of town were spread far apart, with long driveways and big yards. It wasn't like the city where neighbors lived right next to each other. Out here people liked their space. They liked their privacy, and right now that privacy meant nobody wanted to get involved. At the fourth house, an older woman actually opened the door a crack, keeping the chain lock fastened. "What's all this noise about?" she asked, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "My mama. They're hurting her. Please call someone." The little girl begged. The woman's eyes went wide, but then she shook her head. "You need to call the police, sweetheart. I can't get involved in this sort of thing." And just like that, the door closed. The little girl heard the lock click into place with a sound that felt like a slap. She wanted to give up. She wanted to sit down on the road and cry until someone, anyone, decided to care. But giving up meant leaving her mama alone, and she couldn't do that. She wouldn't do that. So she kept running even though her side ached and her throat felt raw from crying. The sun was setting now, painting the sky orange and purple, and she knew that darkness would make everything worse. She had to find help before night fell completely. That's when she saw it, the last house at the end of a long dirt road. It was more of a ranch than a regular house, with a big barn off to the side and a fence that seemed to go on forever. The house itself looked old but sturdy, with a wide porch and a single light burning in the window. The little girl had heard people in town talk about this place. They said a giant of a man lived there, someone who used to be famous in rodeos a long time ago. They said he was mean and unfriendly, that he never talked to anyone and wanted to be left alone. Some kids even made up stories about him, scary ones that probably weren't true. But right now she didn't care about stories or rumors. This was her last chance. Her legs felt like jelly as she ran up the long driveway. It seemed to take forever to reach the porch. When she finally got there, she used every bit of strength she had left to pound on that door. Bang, 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 bang. Her fists hurt, but she didn't stop. "Please," she screamed, her voice breaking. "Please, someone help us. They're killing my mama." They're killing my mama. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. The seconds stretched out like hours. She raised her fist to knock again, ready to bang on that door until her hands bled if she had to. Then she heard it. Heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward the door from inside the house. The porch light flickered on, so bright it made her squint. The door opened. The man who stood there was the biggest person she had ever seen in her entire life. He had to duck slightly to fit through his own doorway. His shoulders were so wide they nearly touched both sides of the frame. He had rough hands that looked like they could bend steel, and a face that was weathered from years of sun and wind. But it was his eyes that she noticed most. They were tired eyes, sad eyes, the kind that had seen too much of the world's ugly side. Right now, those eyes were looking down at her with confusion and something else, something like concern. The giant man didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the crying child on his porch, this tiny girl who had disturbed his quiet evening with her desperate pleas. "They're killing my mama," she said again, but this time her voice came out as barely a whisper. She was so tired, so scared, so desperate for someone to finally listen. "Please, mister. Please help her." The man's jaw tightened. Something changed in his face, like a wall crumbling down. He looked past her into the darkness, then back at her tear-streaked face. "Where?" he asked, and his voice was deep like thunder but surprisingly gentle. "The trailer park. Down the road." "The blue trailer with the broken steps," she said quickly, hope rising in her chest for the first time since this nightmare began. The giant man stood there for one more second, and the little girl could see him fighting some kind of battle in his head. People in town said he never got involved in anything, that he had shut himself away from the world years ago for reasons nobody really knew. But then he stepped out onto the porch, reached back inside to grab his keys and phone, and looked down at her again. "Show me," he said simply. And just like that, the little girl who had been ignored and turned away by everyone else had finally found someone who would listen, someone who would help. She grabbed his hand, hers so small it barely wrapped around two of his fingers, and together they headed toward his truck. The night was falling fast now, but for the first time since she'd started running, she felt like maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay, because sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person everyone avoids becomes the one person brave enough to answer when someone knocks. The big man stood frozen in his doorway for what felt like forever, but was really only a few seconds. His mind was racing, fighting against every instinct he'd built up over the past 15 years. Those instincts all screamed the same thing: don't get involved, stay out of it, keep your head down, protect yourself from more pain. He'd spent so long building walls around himself, creating a life where nobody could hurt him because nobody could get close enough to matter, and now here was this little girl covered in dust and tears, asking him to tear down those walls in an instant. "Please, mister," she said again, and there was something in her voice that cut straight through all his defenses. It was pure desperation mixed with a tiny thread of hope that he might be different from all the others who'd turned her away. He looked down at her properly now. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Her sneakers were worn out, held together with what looked like duct tape. Her clothes were clean but faded from too many washes. This was a kid who didn't have much but who had enough love for her mama to run through the night begging strangers for help. The man's throat felt tight. His own daughter would have been about this age if she'd lived, if that drunk driver hadn't crossed the center line that rainy night 15 years ago, if his whole world hadn't ended in a moment of screeching metal and shattered glass. He shook his head, trying to push away the memories. This wasn't about him. This was about a little girl who needed help right now. "Okay," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. "Okay, we'll help your mama." The relief on her face was immediate and overwhelming. She grabbed his hand with both of hers, trying to pull him toward his truck. Her hands were so small and warm, and he felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for a very long time. He followed her lead, his long legs easily keeping pace with her desperate running. When they reached his old pickup truck, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911 as he opened the driver's side door. "I need police and an ambulance," he said when the operator answered. His voice was calm now, steady. "There's a domestic situation happening at the trailer park on County Road 47, the blue trailer with broken steps. A child says her mother is being attacked by multiple people." The operator started asking questions, wanting more details, wanting him to stay on the line. He answered quickly and precisely while starting the truck's engine. The little girl was already climbing into the passenger seat without being invited, her face set with determination. "You should stay here," he told her, even though he could already tell it wouldn't work. "It might not be safe where we're going." "That's my mama," she said, and the way she said it made it clear there would be no argument. She was going, and that was that. He understood. If someone had told him to stay behind when his family needed him, he wouldn't have listened either. So he just nodded and pulled his seatbelt on, waiting until she did the same. As they drove down his long driveway and turned onto the main road, he kept the operator on speakerphone. The woman's voice filled the truck, asking for more information, assuring him that help was on the way. But he knew these roads. He knew how far the nearest sheriff's deputy would be at this time of evening. 20 minutes, maybe 25 if they were out on the other side of the county. A lot could happen in 20 minutes. "What's your name?" he asked the little girl, trying to keep her talking, trying to keep her focused on something other than her fear. "Lily," she said quietly. Then after a pause, "What's yours?" "Tom," he answered. It felt strange saying his own name out loud. He couldn't remember the last time he'd introduced himself to anyone. "Tell me what happened, Lily. Who's hurting your mama?" Lily took a shaky breath. "Her boyfriend. His name is Danny. He's been mean for a long time, but tonight he's really mad. He brought his friends over and they were all drinking beer and getting loud. Mama told me to go to my room, but I could hear everything. Her voice got smaller. I heard her screaming. I heard things breaking. So I snuck out my window and ran to get help. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The girl had crawled out a window and run through the dark to save her mother. 7 years old and braver than most grown men he'd ever known. You did the right thing, he told her firmly. You're very brave. Everyone else shut their doors, Lily said, and there was hurt in her voice that went deeper than fear. Mrs. Chen said she couldn't get involved. Mr. Rodriguez wouldn't even open his door. I thought nobody would help. Tom felt anger rising in his chest, but not at the little girl. At the neighbors who'd heard a child begging for help and decided it wasn't their problem. At a world where people had become so afraid or so selfish that they'd let a woman get hurt rather than make a phone call or open a door. But he also understood it, and that made him even angrier. He'd been one of those people for 15 years. How many times had he heard something that might have been trouble and told himself it wasn't his business? How many times had he chosen his own peace and quiet over doing the right thing? Well, I'm helping now, he said. And those police are coming too. Your mama's going to be okay. He hoped that was true. He hoped they weren't too late. The trailer park was coming into view now, a collection of aging mobile homes clustered together off the main road. Some were well kept with flower boxes and neat yards. Others were falling apart, forgotten by owners who'd given up or moved on. The blue trailer with broken steps was easy to spot. Every light inside was blazing, and even from the road he could hear shouting. Loud, angry male voices, and underneath those a woman crying. Lily grabbed his arm. That's it? That's our trailer. Tom pulled the truck to a stop at the edge of the property, his mind racing through options. The smart thing would be to wait for police. The safe thing would be to stay in the truck, keep the little girl safe, let the professionals handle it. But through the thin trailer walls he heard glass breaking. He heard the woman scream, a sound of pure terror and pain, and he knew he couldn't wait. Couldn't stay safe in his truck while someone suffered. Not anymore. Not after this little girl had reminded him what courage looked like. Lily, he said, looking her straight in the eyes, you're going to stay in this truck. You're going to lock the doors. You're going to get down low so nobody can see you, and you're not coming out until I come back or the police get here. Do you understand? She nodded, her eyes huge and frightened, but trusting. Trusting him to save her mama. Trusting him to be the hero he'd stopped believing he could be a long time ago. Tom stepped out of the truck and the warm night air hit him like a wall. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He'd spent years in rodeos facing down angry bulls that weighed a ton. He'd been thrown and trampled and broken more bones than he could count. But somehow, walking toward that trailer felt scarier than anything he'd ever done in a rodeo arena, because this mattered in a way that championships and prize money never had. A woman's life was on the line. A little girl's whole world hung in the balance. And for better or worse, he'd just volunteered to step into the chaos and try to make it right. Tom's boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward the trailer. Each step felt heavy, loaded with 15 years of avoiding exactly this kind of situation. Behind him, he heard the truck doors lock with a soft click. Good. At least Lily would be safe while he figured out what to do next. The shouting from inside got louder as he got closer. Now he could make out actual words instead of just angry noise. A man's voice, slurred from alcohol, screaming about money and respect. Another male voice laughing, egging him on. And then a woman's voice trying to sound calm but failing, pleading for everyone to just calm down and talk. Tom stepped onto the broken porch and immediately felt it sag under his weight. The wood was rotten in places, soft and dangerous. He tested each board carefully, not wanting to crash through and make things worse. Through the grimy window he could see into the trailer's small living room. 3 men were crowded into the space. One was tall and thin with tattoos crawling up both arms. Another was shorter but stocky, built like someone who spent time in a gym or a prison yard. The third was the boyfriend, Tom guessed. He had dark hair and wild eyes, and he was standing over a woman who'd been pushed back against the wall. The woman looked terrified. Her face was already showing signs of being hit, with one eye swelling shut and her lip bleeding. She was maybe 30 years old, wearing jeans and a work shirt like she'd just gotten home from a regular job. Just a regular person having the worst night of her life. Tom felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth hurt. The 911 operator was still on his phone, now telling him that deputies were 15 minutes away. 15 minutes. An eternity when someone was in danger. He watched through the window as the boyfriend grabbed the woman's arm and shook her hard enough to slam her head against the wall. She cried out in pain and something inside Tom just snapped. 15 years of staying out of things. 15 years of keeping to himself and not getting involved. 15 years of being numb and safe and alone. All of it just burned away in that moment, leaving behind something he'd thought was dead. The part of him that couldn't stand by and watch someone get hurt. Tom raised his fist and pounded on the trailer door. Not a polite knock. Not a hello, is everything okay? Kind of knock. This was the kind of pounding that shook the entire trailer, that made everyone inside freeze and look toward the door with wide eyes. Open up. Tom's voice came out like a growl, deeper and more commanding than his normal tone. It was the voice he'd used in the rodeo when he needed to be heard over a screaming crowd. Open this door right now. Inside, he could hear rapid whispers. Someone cursed. Footsteps approached the door, unsteady and stumbling. Then the door jerked open and the boyfriend stood there swaying slightly, his breath reeking of cheap beer. The man started to say something smart, probably something threatening or dismissive. But then he actually looked up and saw Tom standing there on his porch. The words died in his throat. Tom was used to this reaction. At 6'7" and built like a mountain from years of ranch work, he tended to make an impression. His shadow fell across the boyfriend like a storm cloud. And for a second, nobody moved. The little girl says you're hurting her mama, Tom said, his voice quiet now but somehow more frightening because of it. That ends now. The boyfriend's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Shock, fear, and then, because alcohol makes people stupid, anger and false courage. Who the hell are you? The boyfriend demanded, puffing up his chest like that would somehow make him more intimidating. This is private property. This is none of your business. I'm making it my business, Tom said simply. Behind the boyfriend, Tom could see the other two men moving. They were trying to position themselves, getting ready for trouble. The stocky one picked up a beer bottle by the neck, holding it like a weapon. The thin one with tattoos cracked his knuckles, trying to look tough. The woman, Lily's mama, was still against the wall. Her eyes met Tom's and he saw hope flicker there, mixed with fear. Fear that he'd make things worse. Fear that he'd leave. Fear that this moment of possible rescue would slip away. You should go, the boyfriend said, and now he was smiling. A mean smile that showed too many teeth. Me and my boys, we don't take kindly to people sticking their noses where they don't belong. He gestured behind him at his friends, who nodded and tried to look menacing. Tom didn't move. Didn't step back. Didn't look away. Police are on their way, he said. They'll be here in about 13 minutes. You've got two choices. You can walk out of this trailer right now, get in whatever car you came in and leave. Or you can stay, and when those deputies arrive, they're going to arrest you for assault. Your choice. For a second, Tom thought it might actually work. The boyfriend's eyes flickered with uncertainty. Maybe some sober part of his brain was doing the math, realizing this was his chance to avoid jail time. But then the stocky friend laughed, a harsh sound with no real humor in it. Man, forget this guy. What's he gonna do? He's one old dude. There's three of us. The boyfriend's face hardened again. The moment of possible sense passed, drowned by alcohol and male pride and the pressure of looking tough in front of his friends. Get off my porch, he said, stepping closer to Tom. Before I make you get off. Tom sighed. He'd hoped it wouldn't come to this. He'd really genuinely hoped that common sense would win out, but hope and reality were often two different things. I'm not leaving without her, Tom said, nodding toward the woman. And her daughter is safe in my truck, so don't even think about using her as leverage. That last part was a calculated risk, letting them know where Lily was. But Tom wanted them focused on him, not thinking about searching for the little girl. And it worked. All three men's attention locked onto him like he'd just issued a direct challenge, which he supposed he had. The boyfriend's face went red with rage. That little brat ran away? When I get my hands on her... You're not getting your hands on her, Tom cut him off. You're not getting your hands on anyone ever again. Now step aside. Tom moved forward, and that's when everything exploded into chaos. The boyfriend swung at him, a wild haymaker that was telegraphed so obviously that Tom had time to duck, block, and think about what he wanted for breakfast tomorrow. The fist sailed over his head, and the boyfriend's momentum carried him stumbling into the porch railing. But the other two were already moving. The stocky one came at Tom with the beer bottle raised high. The tattooed one went low, trying to grab Tom's legs and pull him down, and Tom, who'd spent decades getting thrown by animals that weighed 2,000 pounds, who'd learned to read movement and react faster than thought, just reacted. He stepped into the stocky man's swing instead of away from it, getting inside the arc of the bottle. His shoulder hit the man's chest like a battering ram, and the guy went flying backward through the trailer door, crashing into a table that collapsed under his weight. The tattooed man got hold of Tom's leg but quickly found out that pulling on Tom was like trying to pull down a tree. Tom didn't budge. Instead, he reached down, grabbed the man by his belt and collar, and physically lifted him off the ground. For a second, the tattooed man hung there in the air, shocked and suddenly very aware that he'd made a terrible mistake. Then Tom carried him 3 steps and set him down outside the trailer on the far side of the broken porch. "Stay," Tom commanded, like he was talking to a misbehaving dog, and incredibly, the tattooed man stayed, too shocked and scared to do anything else. The boyfriend was back now, recovering from his stumble. He pulled a knife from his pocket, a folding blade that clicked open with a sound that made Tom's heart race. This had just gotten significantly more dangerous. "Put that down," Tom said, his voice deadly serious. "Put it down before someone gets hurt." But the boyfriend was beyond listening. He was beyond reason. He came at Tom with the knife, and Tom knew that the next few seconds would determine whether he'd be going home tonight or going to the hospital, or worse. Time seemed to slow down as the boyfriend lunged forward with the knife. Tom's rodeo training kicked in, the same instincts that had kept him alive when half a ton of angry bull was trying to trample him. He could almost see the path the knife would take, could calculate the boyfriend's balance and momentum like solving a simple math problem. Tom stepped to the side at the last possible second. The knife whistled past his ribs, missing by inches. As the boyfriend stumbled forward, carried by his own momentum, Tom grabbed the man's wrist with his right hand. His grip was like a vice, years of ranch work having turned his hands into tools of iron. The boyfriend's eyes went wide as he realized he couldn't pull his arm free. Tom squeezed, applying pressure to a specific point on the wrist. It was something he'd learned from an old cowboy years ago. A technique for making stubborn horses drop things from their mouths. Turned out it worked on stubborn people too. The knife clattered to the ground. Tom kicked it away, sending it skittering off the porch into the darkness. Then, moving with surprising speed for a man his size, he spun the boyfriend around and pressed him face first against the trailer wall. "Enough," Tom said, his voice calm despite his racing heart. "It's over," but it wasn't over. The stocky man had recovered from being thrown into the table. He came charging out of the trailer with a roar, blood running from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit something on the way down. Tom saw him coming in his peripheral vision. Without letting go of the boyfriend, he shifted his weight and brought his boot up in a defensive kick that caught the stocky man right in the chest. The impact stopped the charge completely, and the man sat down hard on the trailer floor, gasping for air. The woman, who'd been frozen against the wall this whole time, suddenly sprang into action. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron pan from the stove and held it up like a weapon, her hands shaking but her face determined. "Stay down, Billy," she said to the stocky man, her voice stronger than it had been all night. "I swear I'll hit you if you get up." Tom felt a surge of pride for her. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was fighting back. The tattooed man, still standing outside where Tom had placed him, put his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Hey man, I don't want any trouble. I'm out. I'm just gonna walk away, okay? You're staying right there until the police arrive," Tom said firmly. "You were part of this, you answer for it." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at Tom's face made him think better of it. He sat down on the broken steps and put his head in his hands, looking miserable. Tom could hear sirens now, faint but getting closer. The police were maybe 5 minutes away. He just had to keep control of the situation for 5 more minutes. 5 minutes that felt like they might stretch into forever. The boyfriend was still pressed against the wall, breathing hard. Tom could feel him tensing up, getting ready to try something stupid. "Don't," Tom said quietly. "Whatever you're thinking about doing, don't. You're already looking at assault charges. You want to add assaulting an officer when they get here? Because that's what happens if you keep fighting." "You're not a cop," the boyfriend spat out. "No, but I am making a citizen's arrest for assault and battery," Tom said. He'd looked up the laws years ago, back when he'd still cared about such things. "I witnessed the crime. I have the right to detain you until proper authorities arrive. So you can cooperate or you can make this worse for yourself. Your choice. The boyfriend finally seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him all at once. Maybe the alcohol was wearing off. Maybe reality was starting to sink in. Maybe he just realized he was caught and there was no talking or fighting his way out of this. Inside the trailer, the stocky man was still on the floor, holding his chest and wheezing. The woman with the pan kept it raised, watching him like a hawk. Tom could see the full extent of her injuries now in the harsh light. Both eyes were puffy, her lip was split and still bleeding, and there were bruises forming on her arms where she'd been grabbed. Rage burned in Tom's chest, but he pushed it down. Rage wouldn't help anyone right now. Staying calm, staying in control, that's what would get everyone through this safely. "Ma'am," Tom said gently. "Are you okay? Do you need an ambulance?" She looked at him with tears streaming down her bruised face. "My daughter." "Is Lily really safe?" "She's in my truck," Tom assured her. "Doors locked, out of sight. She's scared, but she's safe. That little girl is a hero. She saved your life tonight." The woman let out a sob and the pan in her hands finally lowered. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, all the strength that had been holding her up just giving out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry she had to see any of this. I'm so sorry I let it get this bad." "Hey," Tom said, his voice as gentle as he could make it while still keeping the boyfriend pinned. "You're not the one who should be apologizing. None of this is your fault. You understand me? None of it." The sirens were getting louder now. Red and blue lights began to flash through the windows, painting the inside of the trailer in alternating colors. Tom heard car doors slamming, boots on gravel, voices calling out, "Police! Everyone stay where you are." 3 deputies rushed onto the scene, hands on their weapons, eyes taking in the chaos. Tom very carefully let go of the boyfriend and raised his own hands, making it clear he wasn't a threat. "I'm Tom Miller," he said calmly. "I called this in. This man and his 2 friends were assaulting this woman. I intervened. The victim's daughter is safe in my truck." The lead deputy, a woman with sharp eyes and gray hair, took in the scene quickly. She'd probably seen situations like this 100 times before. She nodded to the other 2 deputies who moved in to take control of the 3 men. "You're bleeding," she said to Tom, and he looked down, surprised to see that he was. A cut on his arm, probably from when he'd wrestled with the stocky guy. He hadn't even felt it happen. "It's nothing," he said. Another deputy was helping the woman to her feet, speaking to her in low, reassuring tones. A 4th officer that Tom hadn't noticed was already heading toward his truck, probably to check on Lily. "You, Tom?" the lead deputy asked. He nodded. "I'm Deputy Walsh. We've met before, years back. You helped out when the Henderson kid got lost in the woods." She studied his face. "Good to see you, even under these circumstances. Need you to walk me through what happened here." Tom did, keeping it factual and simple. He left out the part about how his hands were shaking, now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Left out the part about how he'd surprised himself by actually getting involved after so many years of hiding from the world. While he talked, the other deputies were cuffing the 3 men and reading them their rights. The boyfriend was shouting now, making threats and accusations that nobody was listening to. The stocky man was quiet, looking pale and sick. The tattooed man was cooperating completely, probably hoping it would help him somehow. An ambulance had arrived too, and paramedics were checking on the woman. Tom watched as they cleaned her wounds and checked her for serious injuries. She kept asking about Lily, and finally Deputy Walsh nodded to another officer who went to get the girl from the truck. Tom saw the moment Lily came running around the corner of the trailer. Saw her face light up when she spotted her mama. The woman knelt down, ignoring the paramedics' protests, and caught her daughter in a fierce hug. Both of them were crying, but these were different tears than before. These were tears of relief, of survival, of a nightmare finally ending. Lily looked over her mama's shoulder and caught Tom's eye. She gave him a small wave and he waved back, feeling something warm and painful unfold in his chest. Something that felt almost like hope. Deputy Walsh was still talking to him, asking more questions, but Tom kept half his attention on the mother and daughter. On Lily's small hands gripping her mama's shirt like she'd never let go. On the way, the woman held her daughter with a kind of desperate love that transcended the pain and fear of the night. That's what family looked like, Tom thought. That's what he'd lost and thought he'd never care about again. But watching them, he realized that maybe his heart wasn't as dead as he'd believed. Maybe tonight, by helping this little girl and her mama, he'd actually helped himself too. Maybe it was okay to care again, to get involved, to be part of the world instead of hiding from it. "Mr. Miller?" Deputy Walsh said, pulling his attention back. "Are you okay?" "You look like you might be in shock." Tom shook his head. "No, I'm fine, just tired. Can I go home soon?" "Need to get your statement on record. Get that cut looked at by the paramedics and probably take a few photos for evidence." "Shouldn't take more than an hour." She paused. "What you did tonight, stepping in like that, it took courage. Not many people would have gotten involved." Tom thought about all the neighbors who'd shut their doors on a crying child, thought about how close he'd come to doing the same thing, how different this night could have ended if he'd chosen his comfortable isolation over doing the right thing. "I just answered my door," he said quietly. That's all anyone had to do. Just answer the door when someone knocked. But even as he said it, he knew it was more than that. It always is. An hour and a half later, Tom finally pulled his truck back into his own driveway. His arm was bandaged where a paramedic had cleaned and dressed the cut. His body ached in places he'd forgotten could ache, but more than anything, he felt exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. The house was dark and quiet, exactly how he'd left it. For 15 years, the silence had been his refuge, his protection against a world that had hurt him too badly to face. Tonight, it just felt empty. He went inside, tossed his keys on the kitchen counter, and sank into his old recliner without bothering to turn on any lights. The moon coming through the window provided enough glow to see by. He sat there in the dimness, replaying the night in his head. When Deputy Walsh had finished taking his statement, she'd told him something that stuck with him. "You know, the boyfriend had a history," she'd said, pulling up records on her tablet. 3 prior domestic violence calls to that address. Restraining order that got dropped. 2 previous girlfriends with protection orders against him. Tonight was escalating toward something really bad. "You probably saved that woman's life." Tom had just nodded, not knowing what to say. What do you say when someone tells you that? "Thank you? You're welcome?" It all felt too big and too simple at the same time. Before he'd left, Lily had broken free from her mama and run over to him. She'd thrown her small arms around his waist as far as they would reach, which wasn't very far, and squeezed tight. "Thank you, Mr. Tom," she'd whispered. "You're my hero." He'd patted her head awkwardly, not sure how to handle the emotion flooding through him. "You're the hero, kiddo. You went and got help. That took more courage than anything I did." But she'd just shaken her head against his side. "Nobody else would help." "But you did. You saved my mama." Now sitting in his dark house, Tom felt tears running down his face for the first time in years. He didn't try to stop them. Maybe he was crying for that little girl and her mama. Maybe he was crying for himself for all the years he'd wasted being numb. Maybe he was crying for his own daughter and wife. Gone but never forgotten. Probably all of it at once. He must have dozed off in the chair because the next thing he knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and someone was knocking on his door. Not pounding like Lily had the night before, but a regular knock. Polite, hesitant. Tom groaned as he stood up, every muscle complaining. He was getting too old for fights, even when they were for a good cause. He limped to the door and opened it. A woman stood there, maybe 60 years old, holding a casserole dish. She looked familiar, like someone he'd seen around town but never really talked to. "Mr. Miller?" she said, sounding uncertain. "I'm Patricia Chen. I live about 2 miles down the road." Tom recognized the name. She was one of the neighbors Lily had gone to for help. One who'd turned her away. "I heard what happened last night," she continued, not quite meeting his eyes. "Heard it from the deputies who came by asking questions. And I just wanted to say—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. That little girl came to my house first. She was begging for help and I told her to call the police herself. I closed the door on her." Tom didn't say anything, just waited. "I was scared," Mrs. Chen said, and now she did look at him, her eyes wet. "I'm an old woman living alone. I heard boyfriend and violence and I just panicked. I didn't want to get involved in something dangerous. But that's no excuse, is it? A child needed help and I shut the door in her face." She held out the casserole dish. "This doesn't make up for it. I know that. But I wanted you to know that you shamed me last night. You did what I should have done. You reminded me that we're supposed to help each other, even when it's scary or inconvenient." Tom took the dish, warm in his hands. "Thank you," he said simply. Mrs. Chen nodded, wiped her eyes, and walked back to her car. Tom watched her drive away, then looked down at the casserole. It was still warm, fresh made this morning. A peace offering, an apology, a promise to do better. He brought it inside and had just put it in the fridge when there was another knock. This time it was a man Tom vaguely recognized from the feed store, holding a basket of fresh vegetables from his garden. "Heard what you did," the man said. "Thought you might like some tomatoes." Over the next few hours, 5 more people showed up. Some brought food. Some just wanted to shake his hand. All of them had heard about what happened, and all of them seemed to feel the same mix of shame and gratitude. Shame that they'd been the type of community where a little girl had to knock on a dozen doors before finding help. Gratitude that at least one person had answered. By noon, Tom's kitchen counter was covered with casseroles, pies, fresh bread, and vegetables. His refrigerator was so full he had to rearrange things just to fit it all. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had this much food in his house. He also couldn't remember the last time he'd talked to this many people in one day. It was exhausting and overwhelming and somehow nice. Strange, but nice. The biggest surprise came around 2 in the afternoon. A news van pulled up his driveway, followed by a car he didn't recognize. Tom's first instinct was to hide, to pretend he wasn't home. He didn't want attention, didn't want to be on TV. He'd just done what anyone should have done. But before he could decide what to do, Lily came running from the car, her mama walking more slowly behind her. The news crew stayed by their van, cameras off, clearly waiting to see if they'd be allowed to film. "Mr. Tom," Lily called out, waving both hands over her head like he might not see her otherwise. Tom stepped out onto his porch and Lily ran straight to him, her mama following with a tired smile. In the daylight, Tom could see the full extent of the damage. Both of the woman's eyes were black and blue. Her lip was swollen. She moved carefully like her ribs hurt, but she was smiling. Actually smiling despite everything. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice a bit hoarse. "I'm Rachel. I didn't get a chance to properly introduce myself last night or to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Tom said. "I'm just glad you and Lily are okay." "We're more than okay," Rachel said. "We're alive. The doctor at the hospital told me that based on my injuries, if that situation had continued much longer." She trailed off, glancing at Lily, not wanting to say the terrible thing out loud in front of her daughter. Tom understood. "What's going to happen now?" "Where will you stay?" "There's a shelter in the next county," Rachel explained. "They have a space for us. Lily and I are going to stay there while I figure things out. Get a restraining order that actually means something this time. Maybe talk to a lawyer about pressing charges that'll stick." She looked back at the news crew still waiting by their van. They want to do a story about what happened. "About you. I told them I'd ask if you were okay with that." Tom shook his head immediately. No news stories. "I didn't do anything special." "You did, though," Rachel said quietly. "You proved that there are still good people in the world. That someone will help if you just keep knocking. And maybe," she hesitated, "maybe if other people hear this story, they'll be inspired to help too. Next time they hear a neighbor in trouble, next time they see something wrong, maybe they'll remember about you and they'll do something instead of looking the other way." Tom hadn't thought about it like that. He'd been so focused on staying out of the spotlight, on maintaining his privacy, but maybe Rachel had a point. Maybe one good thing that could come from that horrible night was encouraging others to be brave, to help, to get involved. "Okay," he said slowly, "but I don't want to be the focus. The focus should be on Lily, on her courage. She's the one who didn't give up." Rachel smiled wider. "Deal." The interview took about 20 minutes. The reporter was professional and kind, not pushing for dramatic details or trying to make Tom into something he wasn't. She asked him why he'd helped when others hadn't. Tom thought about it carefully before answering. "I've spent a long time keeping to myself," he said. "Not getting involved, not letting people in. I had my reasons, and maybe they were good reasons once. But last night this little girl reminded me that being part of a community means showing up when people need you. It means opening your door when someone knocks, even if it's inconvenient or scary." He looked at Lily, who was watching him with those big, trusting eyes. She didn't give up. She kept knocking until someone answered. That's real courage. That's what being a hero looks like. I just did what any decent person should do. Later, after the news crew had left and Rachel and Lily were about to leave for the shelter, Lily hugged Tom one more time. "Will I see you again?" she asked, and there was worry in her voice. Like she was afraid this giant man who'd saved them might disappear back into his solitary life and forget all about her. Tom surprised himself by saying, "Of course you will. You're welcome to visit any time, both of you." He meant it. For the first time in 15 years, he actually wanted people to visit, wanted to not be alone, wanted to be part of something bigger than his own grief and isolation. As he watched them drive away, Tom realized something important. That little girl had saved him just as much as he'd saved her mama. She'd knocked on his door and pulled him back into the world of the living. Reminded him that life still mattered, that people still mattered, that connection and courage and caring were worth the risk of pain. 3 days after that night, Tom found himself sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair at the county courthouse. Deputy Walsh had called and asked him to come down to give additional testimony. The boyfriend and his 2 friends were being officially charged, and the prosecutor wanted to make sure they had all the details straight. Tom hadn't wanted to come. He'd been hoping the whole thing would just fade away, that life would go back to normal. But he was learning that there was no going back. Once you step into the light, it's hard to retreat into the shadows again. The prosecutor was a sharp woman in her 40s named Ms. Patterson. She had kind eyes but a firm handshake, the kind of person who'd seen too many bad situations but hadn't let it make her cynical. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for him to sit across from her at a small conference table. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. According to Deputy Walsh, you're not someone who usually seeks attention." "I don't seek it ever," Tom said honestly. "I just want to make sure Rachel and Lily are safe, that's all." Ms. Patterson nodded. "Well, your testimony is crucial for that. But before we get into the details, I want to make sure you understand what you walked into that night." She pulled out a thick file folder. "The boyfriend is a man named Danny Brennan, 32 years old. This wasn't his first time hurting a partner." She opened the file and Tom saw police reports, photos of injuries, restraining orders, pages and pages of documentation showing a pattern that went back years. 2 previous relationships, both ending with protection orders, Ms. Patterson continued. Multiple calls to police that resulted in warnings but no arrests because the victims were too scared to press charges. History of alcohol abuse. Fired from 3 jobs for aggressive behavior. Tom felt his stomach turn. Rachel knew about all this? Some of it, Ms. Patterson said. But he was good at hiding it at first, charming even. That's how it usually works. By the time she realized what she'd gotten into, she was already trapped. He'd isolated her from her family, convinced her she couldn't make it on her own, threatened what would happen if she left. She pulled out another document. According to the hospital report, Rachel had old injuries too. Broken ribs that had healed improperly, probably from 6 months ago. Burn marks on her arm that she'd told the ER were from cooking accidents. Classic signs of ongoing abuse that she'd been hiding. Tom closed his eyes. He'd seen Rachel's injuries from that night, but knowing there were older ones, knowing this, had been happening for months or maybe years made him feel sick. "The night you intervened," Ms. Patterson said. According to phone records, Rachel had managed to hide her old phone. She was trying to call for help when Danny and his friends caught her. That's when things escalated. They were destroying her. Phone going through her things looking for evidence she might have been planning to leave. It was about control. She leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, the coroner who reviewed the medical evidence said that based on the severity and location of the injuries Rachel sustained, if that assault had continued for another 10 or 15 minutes, we'd likely be looking at a very different outcome, possibly fatal." The words hung in the air like a weight. Tom had known it was bad, but hearing it stated so clearly, so clinically, made it real in a new way. "That little girl saved her mother's life by getting you," Ms. Patterson said, "and you saved her mother's life by responding. I wanted you to know that. Sometimes people help out and wonder if it really mattered. I wanted you to know without any doubt that it mattered." Tom nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady if he spoke. Ms. Patterson gave him a moment, then continued. "All 3 men are being charged. Danny with aggravated assault, unlawful restraint, and violation of a previous protection order. His 2 friends as accessories. Given Danny's history and the severity of this incident, I'm pushing for the maximum sentence. He won't be getting out for a long time. Good, Tom said, and he meant it. They spent the next hour going through Tom's testimony, getting every detail recorded properly. Ms. Patterson was thorough but kind, never pushing too hard when Tom got uncomfortable with certain questions. She explained that Danny's lawyer would probably try to paint Tom as an aggressor, someone who'd used excessive force. Let them try, Tom said. I did what I had to do to protect Rachel and stop an assault. The deputies who arrived on scene saw the situation clearly. The physical evidence backs up everything I'm saying. Ms. Patterson smiled. Good. Stay firm on that if they call you to testify at trial. After the meeting, Tom walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine. He was about to head to his truck when he heard someone call his name. Tom Miller. He turned to see an older woman hurrying toward him, slightly out of breath. She looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place her. I'm Helen Rodriguez, she said when she reached him. You came to my door that night. Well, not you. Little Lily did, Tom remembered. The man who wouldn't open his door. That was my husband who ignored her knock, Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. I was in the back of the house, didn't even know she'd come by until the next day when the deputies came asking questions. When I found out what happened, what my husband had done. She wiped her eyes. We had a long, hard conversation about fear and community and what kind of people we want to be. I'm ashamed that we turned away a child asking for help. There's no excuse for it. It's a scary situation, Tom said, though the words felt hollow. People react differently to fear. Fear isn't an excuse for cowardice, Helen said firmly. And I wanted you to know that my husband and we've signed up to volunteer with the women's shelter in the next county. The one where Rachel and Lily are staying. We're going to do better. Be better. We can't change what we did, but we can make sure we do the right thing going forward. Tom felt something loosen in his chest. That's good, he said. That's really good. Helen gave him a sad smile. You know, the whole neighborhood is talking about what happened. Not gossip, not like that. More like people waking up, realizing that we all got too comfortable looking the other way. Too comfortable with not my problem and don't want to get involved. She patted his arm. You reminded us what community actually means. Thank you for that. After she left, Tom sat in his truck for a long time before starting the engine. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Hi, Mr. Tom, it's Rachel. Deputy Walsh gave me your number. Hope that's okay. Lily wanted me to send you this. Below the message was a photo. Lily, smiling big for the camera, holding up a drawing she'd made. It showed two stick figures, one very tall and one very small, holding hands. Above them, she'd written in crooked letters, My Hero. Tom stared at that photo for a long time, something warm and painful expanding in his chest. When was the last time anyone had thought of him as a hero? When was the last time he'd felt like his life mattered to anyone? He typed back, Thanks for sending this. Made my day. How are you both doing? The response came quickly. Better. Shelter is good. Lily starts back at school next week. We're figuring things out one day at a time. Would love for you to visit when you have time. Lily asks about you every day. Tom found himself smiling. I'd like that. Let me know when's good. As he drove home, Tom thought about what Ms. Patterson had told him, about how close it had been, about how those 10 or 15 more minutes might have meant the difference between life and death. He thought about all the years he'd spent hiding from the world, convinced that staying uninvolved would protect him from more pain. But isolation hadn't protected him. It had just made him numb, made him forget what it felt like to matter to someone, to make a difference. A little girl had knocked on his door and reminded him of something important. We're all connected whether we want to be or not. And when we pretend we're not, when we close our doors and look away, we lose something essential. We lose our humanity. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Tom didn't eat dinner alone. Mrs. Chen had invited him over, insisting that he needed a proper meal after spending the day at the courthouse. Her husband, Mr. Chen, was there too, quiet and ashamed, but trying to be welcoming. Over pot roast and vegetables they talked, really talked. About the neighborhood, about fear and courage, about what it means to be a community instead of just people who happen to live near each other. You know what the saddest part is? Mrs. Chen said as she poured coffee. That little girl had to knock on so many doors before finding help. What does that say about all of us? It says we forgot, Tom said quietly. We all forgot that we're supposed to look out for each other. I forgot too. I spent 15 years forgetting on purpose. He told them about his family, about the accident, about how he'd retreated from life because it hurt too much to stay engaged. They listened without judgment, and when he finished, Mrs. Chen reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You're engaging now, she said. That's what matters. Walking home under the stars that night, Tom realized she was right. He was engaging again, opening up again, living again, not just existing, and it was terrifying and wonderful and painful and good, all at the same time. That's what real life was supposed to feel like, not numb, not safe, but real and raw and full of possibility. The local news story aired on a Thursday evening. Tom hadn't planned to watch it, but Mrs. Chen had called and insisted he come over to see it with her and her husband. So there he sat, uncomfortable in their living room, watching himself on television. The reporter had done a good job, actually. She'd focused on Lily's courage and the importance of community involvement, just like Tom had asked. There was footage of the trailer park, interviews with Deputy Walsh about responding to domestic violence calls, and statistics about how often these situations end tragically when nobody intervenes. And then there was Tom, looking huge and awkward on camera, talking about opening doors when someone knocks. I don't look like that, do I? Tom asked, watching himself on screen. Like what? Mr. Chen asked. I don't know. Scared, I guess, Mrs. Chen smiled. You look human. That's what makes the story powerful. You're not some fearless action hero. You're a regular person who did the right thing despite being scared. That's real courage. The story ended with a call to action, encouraging viewers to look out for signs of domestic violence in their own communities and to not be afraid to help when someone needs it. The reporter gave information for the local shelter, crisis hotlines, and resources for victims. Tom thought that would be the end of it. The story would air, people would watch it, and then everyone would move on to the next news cycle. But he was wrong. By Friday morning, the story had been picked up by regional news stations. By Saturday, it was trending on social media. Someone had turned it into one of those feel-good videos that get shared thousands of times with captions like "Faith in Humanity," "Restored," and "This is what a real man looks like." Tom's phone started ringing constantly. Other news stations wanted interviews. A podcast about everyday heroes wanted to feature his story. Someone from a national morning show reached out about having him on as a guest. He ignored all of it. This wasn't about fame or recognition. This was about a little girl and her mama getting a second chance at life. But the attention did have some unexpected positive effects. The women's shelter where Rachel and Lily were staying received over $50,000 in donations within a week. People from all over the state were sending money, clothes, furniture, and offers to volunteer. The director of the shelter, a woman named Patricia, called Tom personally to thank him. "We've been struggling to keep our doors open," she said, her voice emotional. "We serve 20 families right now, but we have a waiting list of 40 more. These donations mean we can expand, maybe even open a second location. You have no idea what this means." "It wasn't me," Tom protested. "It was the story. People saw what happened and wanted to help. People needed to be reminded that helping matters." Patricia corrected gently. "You showed them that. And now women who were suffering in silence have hope. Just yesterday, 3 women called our crisis line saying they saw the news story and it gave them the courage to leave dangerous situations. 3 women who might still be trapped if they hadn't seen that one person cared enough to intervene." Tom had to sit down when she told him that. 3 more women. 3 more families getting help because of a story about one night. It was overwhelming to think about. The following Tuesday, Tom finally made good on his promise to visit Rachel and Lily at the shelter. He'd been nervous about it, not sure if he'd be intruding or if they'd really want him there. But when he pulled up to the building, a converted 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, Lily came running out before he'd even parked. "Mr. Tom, you came, you really came." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the building, talking nonstop about her new school, her new room, the friend she'd made at the shelter who was also 7 and also liked dinosaurs. Inside, the shelter was nicer than Tom had expected, clean and bright with comfortable furniture and walls painted in cheerful colors. There was a playroom where several kids were doing crafts, a kitchen where 2 women were preparing dinner together, and a common area where someone was watching a movie. Rachel met him in the entrance, looking so much better than the last time he'd seen her. The swelling had gone down, and while she still had bruises, they were fading to yellow and green. More importantly, she looked lighter somehow, less burdened, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Tom," she said, hugging him carefully, "thank you for coming. Lily's been counting the days." "I told you I'd visit," Tom said simply. They sat in the common area while Lily showed him approximately 5,000 drawings she'd made in the past week. Rachel brought coffee and they talked about ordinary things, normal things. Lily's school, Rachel's new job prospects, the counseling sessions they were both attending. "It's strange," Rachel said at one point, watching Lily arrange her drawings in order of importance. "I spent 2 years in that relationship feeling like I was drowning, like there was no way out. And now, even though everything's uncertain and we're living in a shelter and I don't know what comes next, I feel more free than I have in years." "You are free," Tom said. "You got out." "That's the hardest part," Rachel shook her head. "Lily got us out. If she hadn't been brave enough to keep knocking on doors, if she hadn't found you—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. Tom understood. Some thoughts were better left unspoken. Patricia, the shelter director, came over to introduce herself properly. She was younger than Tom expected, maybe 40, with tired eyes that lit up when she smiled. "Mr. Miller, I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to show you something." She led him to a bulletin board near the entrance. "We started this after your story aired." The board was covered with cards and letters. Dozens of them. Some were thank you notes from current shelter residents. Others were from people in the community offering support. But many were from women who'd left abusive relationships years ago, writing to say that they wished someone had helped them sooner, that they were grateful someone was finally talking about this issue openly. One letter caught Tom's eye. It was from a woman in a neighboring county. "I saw the news story about the man who helped when a little girl knocked on his door. I've been living with abuse for 4 years. I have 2 kids. I was too scared to leave, too ashamed to ask for help. But seeing that story made me realize I can't wait for things to get better on their own. Yesterday I called the crisis line. Today I'm making a plan. Thank you for showing me that people do care, that help is possible." Tom had to look away, blinking hard. His throat felt tight. "We get letters like this every day now," Patricia said quietly. "Your story didn't just help Rachel and Lily. It helped dozens of women find the courage to reach out. It helped community members realize they can make a difference. It reminded everyone that we're responsible for each other." Over the next hour, Tom met several other residents of the shelter, women of different ages, different backgrounds, different stories, but all united by the common experience of having survived something terrible and being brave enough to choose a different path. One woman, probably in her 50s, shook his hand with tears in her eyes. "I left an abusive marriage 30 years ago," she said. "Back then, there weren't shelters like this. There weren't resources. I had to figure it all out alone. The fact that places like this exist now, that people like you help, it makes me feel like maybe the world is getting a little bit better." As Tom drove home that evening, his head was spinning with everything he'd seen and heard. He'd thought helping Rachel and Lily was a one-time thing, one night of courage in an otherwise quiet life. But he was beginning to understand that actions ripple outward in ways we can't always predict or control. His phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Walsh. "Hearing good things from the shelter. Thought you should know we've had an increase in domestic violence reports this week. Might not sound like good news, but it is. Means people are finally reporting instead of suffering in silence. The conversation you started is making a real difference." The next Sunday, Tom did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went to church, not because he'd suddenly found religion, but because Mrs. Chen had mentioned that the church was organizing a community meeting to discuss how they could better support vulnerable families in the area. She'd asked if he might come, and somehow he'd said yes. The church basement was packed. Must have been 50 or 60 people there, maybe more. Tom recognized some faces from around town, people he'd seen at the feed store or the grocery but never really talked to. Everyone looked up when he walked in, and for a moment there was silence. Then someone started clapping. And then someone else. And suddenly the whole room was applauding, and Tom wanted to disappear through the floor from embarrassment. The pastor, a kind-faced man named Reverend James, held up his hands for quiet. "We're not here to make Tom uncomfortable," he said with a gentle smile. "We're here to figure out how we can all be more like Tom, how we can build a community where people help each other, where nobody has to knock on a dozen doors before finding someone who cares." The meeting was productive in ways Tom hadn't expected. They formed committees to work with the women's shelter, organized a neighborhood watch program, and discussed creating a community resource center where people could get help with everything from job training to counseling referrals. One woman stood up and suggested starting a program to teach kids about. 6 months felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. Tom stood on the porch of a small house on the east side of town, holding a toolbox in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and cool with autumn, just starting to paint the trees in shades of red and gold. He knocked on the door, and within seconds heard small feet running and Lily's excited voice calling, "It's Mr. Tom. Mama, Mr. Tom is here." The door flew open, and there was Lily, bigger somehow than she'd been 6 months ago, though maybe that was just because she carried herself differently now, more confident, more secure. Her smile was the same though, bright enough to light up the whole world. "You brought the stuff to fix the shelf," she exclaimed, eyeing his toolbox. "Said I would, didn't I?" Tom replied, stepping inside. The house was small but cozy, a 2-bedroom rental that Rachel had managed to secure with help from the shelter's housing program. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and there were drawings everywhere covering the refrigerator taped to the walls, proudly displayed on every available surface. Evidence of a child who felt safe enough to create, to express herself, to take up space. Rachel came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel. She looked like a completely different person from that night 6 months ago. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a ponytail. The bruises and cuts were long gone, replaced by healthy color in her cheeks. But more than the physical healing, there was something different in her eyes. They held confidence now, hope, a belief in the future that hadn't been there before. "Morning, Tom," she said warmly. "Thanks for coming over. That shelf has been driving me crazy for 2 weeks. "No problem at all," Tom said, setting down the groceries. "Brought some things for lunch too, if that's okay. Figured I'd be here a while. Over the past 6 months, this had become routine. Tom would come by every couple of weeks to help with small repairs, to check on them, to just be present. At first, he'd worried he was intruding, that they might feel obligated to welcome him because of what happened. But Rachel had been clear that she wanted him around, that Lily asked about him constantly, that they considered him family now, family. The word still felt strange to Tom after so many years alone, but it was getting easier to accept. While he worked on fixing the wobbly shelf in Lily's room, she sat on her bed telling him about school. She was in 2nd grade now, doing well in reading, making friends. She talked about her teacher, about the science project they were doing, about the upcoming school play where she'd gotten a part as a singing flower. "Will you come watch?" she asked. And there was that vulnerability again, that fear of rejection that probably all kids of trauma carried with them. "Wouldn't miss it," Tom assured her, and watched her whole face light up. Rachel worked at the local feed store now, the same one Tom had been shopping at for years. She was good at the job, the owner said. Reliable, friendly with customers, quick to learn. She was also taking online classes in the evenings, working toward a business degree, building toward a future she'd never thought possible before. "The counseling is helping," Rachel told Tom over sandwiches at lunch. Lily was in the other room watching cartoons, giving the adults space to talk. "I'm learning that none of what happened was my fault, that I didn't deserve it, that I'm allowed to want better, to expect better." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I'm also learning how to spot the warning signs I missed before, so I never end up in that situation again." "Good," Tom said simply. "You deserve to be safe, both of you do. The trial is next month, Rachel said quietly. Danny's lawyer tried to get the charges reduced, but Ms. Patterson says it's not going to work. There's too much evidence. Too many witnesses. The judge denied bail, so he's been in jail this whole time. She looked up at Tom. I used to be terrified of him. Spent 2 years walking on eggshells, trying to keep him calm, trying to prevent the explosions. But now I just feel nothing. Maybe a little sad for who I thought he was at the beginning before I saw his true self. But mostly nothing. He doesn't have power over me anymore. Tom reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's freedom right there. It is, Rachel agreed, and I owe it to you. You owe it to Lily, Tom corrected, and to yourself for being strong enough to accept help. I just opened a door. Rachel smiled. You keep saying that like it's nothing, but opening that door saved our lives, Tom. Don't diminish what you did. After lunch, Tom helped Lily with her homework while Rachel ran errands. Math problems about addition and subtraction, simple stuff that nonetheless required concentration and patience. Tom had forgotten what it was like to help a child learn, to watch them work through problems and have little moments of understanding dawn on their face. His own daughter had been learning to read when the accident happened. He'd been teaching her to sound out words, celebrating every small victory. The memory hurt less now than it used to. Time didn't heal all wounds, but it did soften the sharp edges, made them bearable. Mr. Tom? Lily said, looking up from her math worksheet. Can I ask you something? Sure, kiddo. Why do you live all alone? Don't you get lonely? Tom considered how to answer. He could give her a simple response, change the subject. But Lily had trusted him with her worst night. He could trust her with some truth, too. I used to have a family, he said carefully. A wife and a daughter about your age. But there was an accident and they died. After that, I was so sad that I didn't want to be around people anymore. I thought being alone would hurt less. Lily's eyes were wide and serious. Did it? Hurt less? No, Tom admitted. Being alone just made me numb. I stopped hurting, but I also stopped feeling anything good too. No joy, no connection, no love. That's not really living, is it? No, Lily agreed solemnly. Then, with the directness only children possess, she asked, Do you still miss them? Every day, Tom said. But I'm learning that I can miss them and still be happy. That loving them doesn't mean shutting everyone else out. They wouldn't have wanted me to spend 15 years alone. Lily nodded like this made perfect sense. I think they would be proud of you for helping us. Tom's throat got tight. I think so too. When Rachel got home, she found Tom and Lily in the backyard. He'd set up the small basketball hoop he'd bought as a surprise, and they were taking turns shooting baskets. Lily was terrible at it, her shots barely reaching the rim, but she was laughing and trying, and that's what mattered. You're spoiling her, Rachel called out, but she was smiling. Someone's got to, Tom called back. That evening, as the sun started to set and Tom prepared to head home, Rachel walked him to his truck. You know the community center is opening next month, right? She said. The one they organized after that church meeting. Tom nodded. He'd heard about it. The town had come together in remarkable ways over the past 6 months. The community center would offer counseling services, job training, after-school programs for kids, support groups for various issues, all funded by donations and volunteers, a testament to what people could accomplish when they decided to care. They want to name a room after you, Rachel said. The Tom Miller Family Resource Room. Patricia from the shelter suggested it, and the board voted yes unanimously. Tom felt his face get hot. That's not necessary. Maybe not necessary, but it's right, Rachel said firmly. You started something important. You showed people that one person making one choice can change everything. Let them honor that. Tom wanted to argue, but he could see it meant something to her, so he just nodded. Okay. If it's that important. Rachel hugged him then, standing on her tiptoes to reach around his shoulders. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For answering the door. For not giving up on us. For being part of our lives now. Thank you, Tom hugged her back carefully, this woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger. Thank you for reminding me how to live again. As he drove home that night, Tom's phone buzzed with a text from Deputy Walsh. Thought you'd want to know. 2 more women came forward this week after the news did a follow-up story. Both left dangerous situations, both getting help now. The ripples keep spreading. Tom smiled and texted back. Good. At home, his house was different than it had been 6 months ago. There were photos on the refrigerator now, pictures Lily had drawn for him. There was a calendar on the wall with various commitments marked. Dinner with the Chens, Lily's school play, his volunteer shift at the shelter, a neighborhood barbecue. His answering machine had messages. His kitchen had food from neighbors. His life had people in it again. It wasn't the same as what he'd had before. You couldn't replace lost loved ones, but it was something new, something good, something worth having. Tom made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Normal things, everyday things. The kind of things that make up a life instead of just an existence. Before he turned off the light, he looked at a photo on his nightstand. His wife and daughter, taken a few months before the accident. They were smiling at the camera, happy and alive and full of love. I'm doing better, he said to the photo quietly. I'm living again. I hope you're proud. He could almost imagine they were, could almost feel their approval, their relief that he'd finally found his way back from the darkness. All because one evening, when he could have stayed in his comfortable isolation.